Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey everyone, this is Jen Bucholtz, and you are watching the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Jen, I think we've met before. And
I think we met in passing, yes.
Yes. And I feel like maybe it was Kuwait, but it was early on in the Iraq War. And I don't remember what your email address was, but I think there was some kind of tree theme in it, like tree climber, tree hugger, something like that. Is that right?
Well, my personal email has climb in it, like rock climbing, because that's my favorite sport.
Then for sure we met before.
So
yeah.
we must have crossed paths somewhere if you remember that.
Yeah, I do. I do remember that. That's funny.
It's interesting what sticks with you over the years.
Yeah, that's what sticks. Nothing else. But I saw your face and I'm like, I know this person. How do I know her? And just the word tree and climb were in my head. So how fun is that?
When were you in Iraq and Kuwait?
All of it, pretty much. 04 to I left Kuwait. I mean, I left Iraq for the last time in 2011, and I left Afghanistan for the last time in 2012. But pretty much every year except for 2007, I was always in the desert.
I was in Iraq 04 to 05, and then Afghanistan 2010 to 2011. So we must have crossed each other's path at some point. Yeah,
that 04 to 05 time frame seems right to me.
Mm-hmm.
and I thought you might have known each other through Fort Huachuca.
We know mutual people there, like the first sergeant, but I don't think we were actually there at the exact same time.
Okay.
No, I left there in 98 and or 99 technically. So that's
okay.
Yeah.
And I was there in 01, so a little bit later.
Yeah. Well, that's fun for everybody to hear us catch up. But the neat thing, so you were a counterintelligence agent when you went through the schoolhouse, is that correct?
That's correct. Yep. That's what I went into the Army as. So it was my one and only MOS.
Same. Well, no, that's not true for me. I had an 88 November MOS because the military and the reserves thought, this is what we need. And
right. Well, they've changed it now, I think. My understanding is you can't just come in as an agent anymore. You have to have been in the military active duty for a while. Well, I don't know if you have to be active duty, but you have to have been in for a while and be an E5 promotable, I think, and then you can apply for the agent course.
Is that right, Eric? Do you know?
I know they were pushing toward turning it into, just as you describe, as in a sessions branch where, you know, as you take it to heart, a lot of folks ask, well, how do I get into intel? And the real answer is do something else first.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're build a set of background that you're able to then to bring in. I think what they were having was a glut with, and this was late 90s with the E6, E7 ranks. In fact, we had, when I was in command in Darmstadt, we had the E7 board had come out and nobody was on it. And it was just amazing. How many E6s we had in our company. And I think we had at least 6 of them, and they were all fantastic folks. And, mid 90s, this was the only game in Bosnia and the Balkans was the only game in town. These guys had all done a long tour, again, as the premier in intel in the country. I mean, nobody was really relying upon signal that much. It wasn't really relying upon the other disciplines. So human-based intelligence was it. So these guys all had this fantastic set of experience coming out, and not a single one of them was accepted for E7 promotion. And that was discouraging. I know a lot of them just said, "All right, well, I'm just getting out." And so I think that's the trouble they ran into, is that there was. They said, well, we really didn't need that many E7s because we have a whole bunch of E4 and E5s. Then comes Abu Ghraib, and the troubles with the dismantling interrogation companies, and then sending out folks who are not properly trained, I think from the same unit, to Abu Ghraib and to have them run that prison and to find all the problems with that they ran into. So that would be behind the, one, let's make this in the sessions, bring in folks with a little more experience, give some a little bit more maturity to the agents. But then at the second time, in the second case, they had gotten rid of all their interrogation, their human collection units at the core level. And so in the rush in the middle of the war on terror, they decided they needed to set up entire interrogation battalions and get them trained up as quickly as possible. So that's part of what I was doing, is they built an interrogation prisoner of war camp at Camp Bullis, Texas, which is just north of San Antonio. That's still functioning. They got mock-up walls and towers, and it's interrogation rooms, closed circuit video monitoring, so they can train different students with the questioning techniques. And then they even have role players. Those are the guys that I was in charge of that wrote all the scripts, came up with the pocket litter, all the details of it. Place is a fantastic location. It has everything but running water and sewage. So
nobody needs that.
Yeah, these guys have been there 7 years and they're still using pit toilets outside. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's just one of those things where the Army thought they were getting a great peace dividend in the 90s by, let's get rid of all our interrogators. We're really not going to need them because we're not going to be fighting the Russians streaming through Fulda Gap in Germany. And then all of a sudden we run into a scenario where human-based intelligence is really one of the only games in town, and the military caught themselves short in that case. So I can understand if that is the case. I just gave you all the reasons behind why they're doing that.
And let me just accentuate what you were saying there, Eric, because right before you took command of Delta Company 165th, we were transitioning, even the agents, we were going to be strategic assets.
Right.
And we were getting rid of all of our long rifles, and we were all going to carry 9mm. We were housing the last remaining interrogators that were going to be in the division, and there weren't that many of them, and they were all going away, and everything changed in an instant.
I was at the deflagging or decommissioning ceremony of the Alpha Company, which was the interrogation company. They did it in the middle of the Lukovac coal factory, with the blackened ground and everything. They decommissioned that company, broke it down, and then just rolled all the interrogation assets into Delta Company with the counter intel folks and the remaining linguists and that kind of thing. So when I took command of Delta Company 2 months later, it was a mishmash of 150, linguists and counter intel, and they brought in a reserve company they called them Turbo Serbo. So they were a reserve company from California who were Russian linguists who they gave 2 weeks of Serbo-Croatian and then just let them loose. Well, the majority of the company was 20, late 20s, early 30-year-old blonde girls, which the misogynist society of the Balkans had wanted to have nothing to do with them anytime we sent a team out. And so we had these linguists that were just great. We can't send them out independently anywhere because nobody will talk to them or talk through them as interpreters. So it was just a mishmash nightmare of deactivating an entire unit in the middle of a deployment.
It's another funny thing that happened just before that too, that proved to be, at least from my point of view, a miscalculation. Was there was a Charlie Company in the battalion. By the way, that battalion, Jennifer, as we go through this litany of 165th, it was the interrogators and CI teams that are out. That was Delta Company. Mm-hmm. There was, of course, the headquarters company that was there to provide support, and then there were the Rangers that wanted nothing to do with anybody in the battalion because they. Right. Just kind of bolt. And Charlie Company was a company they had. I don't know if they ever officially deflagged America or not, but they got rid of the MDCI, the multidiscipline counterintelligence.
Yeah,
asset.
Actually, it was Bravo Company was the strategic SIGINT assets. Charlie Company was the LURS infantry guys, but because they had regimentally affiliated themselves as Echo 51st Infantry, that's again, not wanting to do anything with the intel guys. They called themselves Echo Company, but technically, according to the table of organization equipment, they were technically Charlie Company.
Yeah, and you're right. It was Bravo
Yeah.
Company. Yeah.
So yes, so the company had the headquarters, it had Delta Company and Echo Company, and that was it. By '96. So
I'm glad that we got that on the record. By the way, the MDCI asset turned out to be pretty important later on too, because they just call it something else now.
Right. So
there was issues even in the mid 2000s when I was up for reenlistment. I was an E5 and they wanted nothing to do with me for reenlistment. There was literally I couldn't get duty station of choice, no bonus, and I wanted to go to warrant officer school, and I couldn't get any of those. They're like, E5 agents are a dime a dozen. We have too many. And then they caught themselves short. It's like the same cycle that you guys were just talking about in the 90s. They caught themselves short a few years later and were desperate for agents in the E6, E7 range.
The biggest problem I've seen with, just in my experience with Army Intel, is that it's a branch rife with quote unquote visionaries. And so when you have that, you don't have anybody there's no stability for organization. There's no stability for structure and ways of doing business. So it's a new officer or senior NCO will get into a position and say, all right, this is how we're going to do things. And it's very adaptable, but the problem is you adapt so much that nobody can provide continuity or lessons learned or anything like that. So we kept learning our same mistakes over and over. And this was, even in the last building I was in, was INCOM headquarters, was every 2 years a new visionary would fill every position as different folks would rotate in and out. The civilian employees would just nobody listens to us, but I mean, it got to the point where offices would be physically moved around every 2 years. There was a new wall up, or there was a new physical structure within the same building, and a new organization, a new way of doing things. And so when I haven't been working in the building in forever, but I've been associated with know people that have been there for past 20 years, and I couldn't tell you. If you could walk into one part of the building, I couldn't tell you whose office was where, because they probably physically change them, actually tear down walls and put up doors and, give somebody a feat and, every so often. And that's not just at headquarters. I like what they do. I like my time here. I think their mission is sound, but it's just endemic of Intel overall. When some new officer or even a general officer will become the, director of whatever or chief of whatever, and they have to remake everything in their own image. Well, then the next guy comes in and says, all right, forget about all of that. Now we're going to do it my way. There's really no continuity like in a combat arms unit that says, no, we actually have to have our tanks. No, we actually have to have infantrymen on the line. And this is a standard organization that we've been working with for decades. So that kind of stability is shot.
And let's and I swear Jennifer's going to get a chance to chat here. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. No, you're fine.
But the other thing is that notice all that change and turmoil, which I think we all experienced. I mean, when I was at Huachuca, I say Huachuca because I was in different battalions. I was in different companies all the time. They were constantly changing where we were. And I was just a teacher in a class,
Right.
It's like, but it was always but we were never focused on developing tactical ability. And I don't want to speak for you, Jen, but I know, like, before my Bosnia deployment, the thing I had done the most was scrub potbelly stoves and practice winter driving and repeat training that I'd already had, because no one could, we just didn't know what to do. So we literally deployed, and I was % prepared in terms of my day-to-day job, how to do it, what to do. And that took I don't know your experience, Eric, but I know from talking to my peers, that took a lot of teams offline because the warrants weren't strong enough to defend their people, so they would get tasked out to burn poop. I mean, why would a CA agent be burning poop when they should be outside the camp,
Yeah.
And so these things, they never focus on actual building capacity. I learned how to do this job, through trial and error and OJT, and that's just not a very good way to do this. In garrison, as a stratical asset, we practiced surveillance once on a PX. you know.
Right.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. It was good refresher training, but in no way developed capacity.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
did you feel prepared before your deployment, Jen? Like, were you given anything besides some basic conversational practice?
Well, my deployment was a little unique because I was active duty in Iraq. However, I wasn't working under the big army. So I had a very unique experience working for an agency under Department of Defense while I was there, or being assigned to them, I should say. And so we didn't travel around in, up armored vehicles. We weren't in uniform. Obviously, we were armed to the T, but we were in civilian clothes, and we drove low-profile vehicles that had been obtained from the local economy. And a lot of people are shocked when they hear that. Like, why would you ever go outside the wire in an unarmored vehicle? Well, actually, it turned out to be safer because you throw on a headscarf, take your sunglasses off, and you just look like another local driving around. So my unit suffered very little in terms of injury. No injuries outside the wire. Actually, our injuries were inside the wire, either from, rockets being fired in to the green zone, or we also had two, Pete, you might remember this, but when the Green Zone Cafe was attacked by a suicide bomber, and then the souk attacked just a few minutes later by a second bomber, basically simultaneous attacks. We did have people in those two places who were injured, but fortunately no deaths. However, we did have to evacuate a couple to the rear for treatment.
And then in that time, as you were, going out into town, I did a lot of this stuff too, because I ended up talking myself into working for the SEALs, and they're like, we have cars, we have dead people, we can always make both of those things show up, So we would go into town and have meetings, and they'd be really hasty meetings, in and out real fast. But I was trained from Bosnia. I was trained to do that. I knew what to ask about. I knew how to get to it quickly and get on the road again. So I was valuable to what they did. But how did you guys operate once you got out of those cars? That's a question I get asked a lot. Like, how did you blend into society? I didn't try to personally. I just said, yeah, I'm here to ask questions, find things out, keep people safe. Can we have a chai? That's how I did it. But how did you do it?
For the most part, we weren't out of our vehicles when we were outside the wire. If we had to go pick up a clandestine source, which I often helped our case officers with, I'd pull security for them. We would bring that source back to the green zone or to another safe, considered a safe haven, which we had several set up around Baghdad. But we were not actually out in the community walking around. If we were out in the community, we were in the vehicle. Because obviously, you can't see me right now, but I'm 5'11" and I have light brown hair, blue eyes. I obviously am not going to blend in well, even with a headscarf on. So, so we did most of our operating inside the wire, or most of our meets, I should say, inside the wire. But the interesting part of my job, or one of the very interesting parts, was I did the force protection for our unit. So, like when I got there, most of our COs were just running Route Irish, which was the most dangerous 4-mile strip of highway in Iraq at the time. And so I made it part of my duty basically to find them alternate routes to get around the city so that there was less targeting going on. Because Route Irish was the main thoroughfare between the Green Zone and the Baghdad airport. And so, the bad guys knew that there was going to be convoys and Americans going down that road constantly. So they would just sit out there and pick them off or set up car bombs on the side. So, I took it upon myself to find a lot of alternate routes that turned out to be really useful and I think kept our people safe. In terms of questioning, I think I had gotten some good experience because I'd been stationed in Korea for a year prior, and I'd been the agent in charge at a remote location in Korea, and we had about 25 or 30 sources that we worked with on a regular basis. So I got some really good experience there in terms of source meetings and intel report writing and questioning techniques. And so I was very fortunate to have that real world experience under my belt.
Do you have a question, Eric?
No, I was just one of the things that intrigued me about Jennifer's background was, she has had the same, a lot of the same experience that you and I have had, different areas and different mission sets. But one of the big things I wanted to ask her about was what what led to your transition from military and operations to quite honestly, academia and investigations?
Well, my education is in criminal justice and forensic science. And there's some overlap to counterintelligence in there, but they're really quite separate disciplines. And so after I was out of the military and I contracted for about 7 years, and then basically my husband's like, are you ever going to come home? You're never here. And so I gave up the contracting and I was just looking around for other options for employment, and American Military University popped up somehow, and they had an opening for instructor in criminal justice and forensics. And so I applied, got the interview, and obviously got the job, and then it went from there. But over the past several years since working at AMU, I've done some other contract gigs on the side, some involving surveillance, some overseas training for the State Department. So I've had some pretty interesting experiences in the last few years too, and those have sort of put me in the direction of more the criminal investigation type field now. And so I went and got my private investigator license a couple years ago here in Colorado, and have done a couple things under that. And I'm really just trying to work towards contributing more to the field of unsolved crimes, because I'm just finding it's overwhelming, the amount of unsolved crimes in our country, and the burden law enforcement is trying to carry that they just can't keep up with. And I think I have some really good skills to put towards that field. And there's a lot of other people out there who can too. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but explains a little bit, I guess, about my background and how I've morphed over to the criminal
Was there ever a
side.
moment when you thought about, like, really seriously thought about re-enlisting when you were in that window to do it, or was that already over at that point?
No, I wanted to. My plan was to re-enlist and go to warrant officer school. But because I was not E5 promotable, and that's because I had been deployed to Iraq, I couldn't go
Shame on you.
I couldn't go to the board. Yeah. So there was just no incentive to re-enlist. And they're like, well, you can extend your contract another 18 months, go to the board, get your E6, and then we can talk about re-enlistment. But I really disliked my unit that I was at. I'm not going to name names, but I had a really horrible NCOIC that I just didn't get along with at all. And I was like, I can't imagine working for this guy for another 18 months. And then on top of that, I was recruited by a DoD agency to do surveillance, covert surveillance work and force protection work on a contract basis around the same time. So I was like, well, maybe this is what's meant to be. And so I obviously did not re-enlist, and I took the contract job and stayed with them for the next 5 years.
Did you find that the Army in general wanted you to stay in? Was there anybody above you championing, like, hey, we need you to stay? I mean, regardless of what schools or experience, like, you just need experienced people to stay. Was anybody an advocate or a guide or a mentor in terms of, like, warrant's good, but you should also consider this or that? Did anybody pick up that burden for you and guide you at all?
I had several warrant officers along the way who definitely encouraged me to make a career of it. And in fact, some of them I still consider some of my top mentors out of any job I've had. And so, yes, I definitely had people rallying and like encouraging me to stay in. And but when it came down to it, I had no support from the unit I was at. And the re-enlistment officer, he just does re-enlistment. I don't think he understood the value of one MOS over another. So nobody was really pushing for me to stay in at the very end, if that's what you're asking.
And that's one of the problems that Intel has in the Army, DoD wide every year, is there's always a transition percentage, and it hovers somewhere around. In a good year, the military will lose about 8% of their active duty military every year. Well, for Intel, whatever it is for the rest of the military, Intel is double. And part of the reason is, and Pete, you and I in general, all would be considered mid-careerists, folks who got out prior to going the full 20 years. And one of the biggest reasons is because there is so much work that is related on the outside to do, which, oh, by the way, the rules are different. You're not doing, mandatory deployments. You're not, you're picking and choosing it as a contractor. Oh, by the way, we're going to pay you a ton more than what they're paying inside. And so, I mean, I was losing soldiers left and right at when I was working for INSCOM, because one, it's in the DC Beltway, but they were taking, just boldly approaching contractors in the building, coming right up to my E5s and E6s, like, hey, how'd you like to make double what you're making now, and then you don't have to go to PT anymore? And done. Not a problem. You don't have to deploy if you don't feel like it. That kind of thing. But when I did leave the military, and I asked Jen if you had the same thing, is like there's always an exit interview that they'll go through just to ask you some basic questions. And one of them is, did you have a mentor? Which is exactly what Pete just asked you. And as soon as I heard that, the first thing that came to my mind is like, you mean, did I have a sugar daddy? No. I mean, I had several mentors, but I had no one that was carrying me from assignment to assignment, making calls for me to do do this choice assignment or whatever. I had one general officer stand in to extend my tour at INSCOM. Then it was the INSCOM commander, General Noonan. He did make one call to branch to allow me to stay and not have to make a decision to leave within a few weeks. To the next assignment at Fort Bragg or Fort Hood or something like that. But beyond that is what they've identified. That was a big key piece. If you do not have somebody you considered a mentor, and a mentor besides somebody who can make a career decision for you, somebody who could make some calls for you. Nobody manages your career better than yourself, but it sure is nice to have one of the 300-pounders, on your side when you needed it. And folks who did not have that, who didn't establish that, and I admit that, like myself, no, that was it. I mean, that was it for your career. So there is a big hemorrhaging of intel on a regular basis. And part of it is the ability to mentor folks. And intel gets such a crazy series. At one time you're working with operators and counter intel. Then you're working with SIGINTers, which, are, they're glued to a computer screen all day. It's a totally different mentality, totally different. And they don't mix, all these different personalities in intel don't mix.
When I was in Delta Company, before you got there, Eric, one of the things that the previous commander had said was this deployment will not slow down careers, which you knew instantly was nonsense, because you couldn't go to PLDC if you were deployed, and you had to have PLDC to promote. So there were all kinds of E4Ps that promoted, or E4s that wanted to be P, which is promotable for the audience. Yeah. And then at one point, Brian Fuller, my good friend Brian Fuller, and I wanted to put in OCS packets. And we called back to the rear, figured all the logistics out. And by we, I mean Brian, because he was in headquarters. And he's like, it's going to take us less than 72 hours if everything goes right. Worst case is that we have to catch the next plane because some administration function didn't do it. But for us, it'll be all running around, no rest. And I'm like, I'm in. Let's do it. Put 4187s in to request to go back to do this. And we're absolutely rejected. Not a chance. We're not going to send you guys back on a vacation.
Out of hand. I think that was because of the prevailing belief that, and it wasn't just the previous commander, but up his chain, that they thought, again, this is the first major deployment for the U.S. Army in decades. Anybody who goes here is going to be golden for promotion and advancement and everything else. And that just simply wasn't true.
Yeah. And then as I was getting ready to get out, my time to reenlist decision, it all had passed. I was literally on the doorstep of ETSing. And my commander calls over to the CIFSO course where I worked and calls my warrant officer. And he didn't even actually ever get through to me because the chief's just like, too late. He's leaving. Bye. I hung up on him.
Oh, wow.
But not even no one gave a fuck about me except for my NCOIC, who she's like, just get out. You're in this trough between people and you're never going to get caught up.
Yeah, it's like saying leadership is one of the biggest problems that Intel faces. I had to write my own end of service award.
Jesus.
Wow.
And I had to run down the hall to get an infantry lieutenant colonel to sign it and say that and submit it for me, because my boss was on some TDY or whatever, and it just never got around to it. So I wrote my own award, and they finally called me after I was on terminal leave and said, we need you to come back in and get this award. Will you put your uniform back on? And actually it was beyond, after my terminal leave. I said, no, I've already ATS. I put a uniform on, I'm breaking the law, essentially. I'm not, it's like, it was amazing. So I had to go back in a suit, suit and tie, and receive my end of service award that I wrote myself. So
my PCS award out of the 165th was even better. I was a month ahead of you guys in redeployment. And so, because I had to out process, because that's just how the timing worked out. And so my end of assignment award, my PCS is for the audience. It's just like, hey, thanks. These are the great things you did. I had just gone on this amazing deployment and done all this great stuff. And I stood there in the battalion headquarters in the dark with an E4, and he's like, attention to orders. And it was just the two of us. And he was clowning me because it was ridiculous. But the thing was I was so pissed off at the leadership, present company excluded, that I didn't want to stand in front of those fuckers. I wanted nothing to do with how I'd been treated and lied to. I was like, get me the fuck out of here. Yeah.
When we left the Balkans, between myself and First Sergeant Owen, we wrote every single award for the entire company. We personally, we had to do it, because it got to the point where, I put people in for awards. All right, you didn't cover this guy. How come you didn't cover these guys? How come you didn't cover these guys with this one? Finally got to the point where we were excluding. We got down to there was only 6 people who weren't going to get one, and then the message just came down. All right, just write one for everybody. So we ended up it was just a paper. At that point, it just became a paperwork drill. We were disgusted by it, but that's only we were there for 3 days just writing awards. Trying to do the best we can, trying to make up whatever we could. And it was really rubber stamping the entire effort.
So Jen,
I felt the exact same way as you at the end. I'm not trying to toot my horn, but I got a Bronze Star when I came back from Iraq. But they, on my last day at my last unit, when I'm out processing, they wouldn't give it to me unless I did what they wanted you to do, which was go get my Class A's and get up in front of the whole unit. And I said, no. I said, well, it's on my record. You can either choose to give it to me now, or I'm walking out of the building. I don't care. But I'm not getting up in front of these people some of who really almost tried to, did kind of mess with my Army career and pretend that they actually support me. So they finally gave it up, and I just walked out of the building with it in my hand. But
I was at Huachuca, I was an E5. I was E4 and ran the S2 for the battalion of 1,000 people, but it was actually just it's such a crazy thing. Anyhow, and then I worked in I was always 2 grades, if not more, below where I was supposed to be, because I really shouldn't have been at Huachuca. I just lucked out. And so they put me in for an MSM, which is wholly appropriate for my peers and the work I was doing. And they downgraded that thing to an ARCOM or an AM, I don't know, something. And I threw the thing in the garbage when I got back from the board ceremony. I was like, it's an insult. It's an insult,
Yeah.
So enough about the military side of Intel. You go on to do these other things, but what I really want to get into now in this latter part is your guys' passion for these cold cases. And I think it's a great point to say, hey, nobody's got the bandwidth to cover these things, and we have so many more tools than we had even 20 years ago to really get after these problems. Will you guys talk a little bit about this?
Jen, you have the stats on the amount of unsolved cases there are. I think you're the one that was telling me about them. Do you remember them off the top of your head of how many per year or something like that?
My understanding right now is we have easily over 100,000 unsolved homicides in our country. I mean, you see different statistics, and it's hard to know the exact number, but I actually get the feeling we're closer to 200,000. And that's 200,000 families who have no answers.
Right.
That's and a percentage of those, the victims have never even been found. So they don't even have a body. And but at AMU, thanks to Erik and a couple other people, we're starting a cold case club that we're working on establishing now. So I'm really excited about that.
And part of what, and I actually met Jennifer a couple of months ago. we're basically, and it's because of a cold case, which we can't even talk about right now, but I'm sure it'll come to light soon. But, and I mean, Pete, because I brought Tom Colbert on the show last year. We've been working the D.B. Cooper case since 2011. And, that's our guy, Bob Rackstraw. He passed away last year. And so there's not much more we can do on the case. We are still finding out a lot more information about it, but it's enough for Tom, who's an investigative reporter and a producer himself, working out of Los Angeles, that he's now in the market of finding a documentary for us to go on. So there's a couple of different places that he's looking at doing that, or a series of documentaries for this D.B. Cooper case. But in light of that, another very high visibility case had come up for Tom and I all through the spring and through the summer. We started working that together. And then and as I have to brief my leadership on, oh, by the way, I might have to go fly out to a certain location and do a dig or to interview or do a part of this documentary or whatever, as working with that and through our marketing folks and through our academics, I got word from one of our VPs of marketing. Says, there's a professor, Jen Bucholtz, who's working on another case, and it is another high visibility case. And she's been working with a guy that's an investigative reporter himself, who's been working on this case for 5 years. And you guys should get together and talk. And so I immediately made contact with Jen, got her linked up with our cold case team lead, Tom Colbert, and it's just, we found a pattern with some of the things that we've been working, and that for a lot of the cold cases, they're as even the ones that haven't been solved over a year, but some of these that we've been working on, like Cooper itself, the next year is the 50th anniversary of his jump, and it's still quote unquote unsolved, one of the only unsolved cases in FAA history. But what we're finding that is a lot of the traditional approaches that you do for investigations, we're kind of turning that on its head. And one of the things that Jen just mentioned is we're looking at starting a cold case team or a club. I know Tom doesn't want to call it a club, but we're going to open that up to all of AMU's grad students and grad students and alumni who are essentially in the field. Now the average age of our student is 33 years of age. I think 32 now with this year because of the COVID. But we have so that's a lot of people that we have that are our students who are active investigators, active law enforcement, active military, and essentially are in the business. And so this is a fantastic way of using crowdsourcing. That's why I want to throw it back to Jen and talk a little bit about how you've seen firsthand that crowdsourcing to solve an unsolved mystery has already paid off, and we're going to try to mold that into a hard technique going forward.
Yeah, I don't think Pete knows my background yet on this case, but I started writing about an unsolved murder out of Arkansas the beginning of 2019, basically. I started looking at it. And I took a trip out there. I made contact with an investigative journalist. His name's George Jared. He's followed this unsolved case since day one. Literally, he was there when they found the victim's body back in 2004 and has written numerous articles over the years about her case, to include 3 books he's written with chapters on her case. So anyways, I made contact with him, and I actually, before I wanted to start writing my series of articles, I decided I needed to go out there and see some of these locations on the ground. So my husband and I went out there, and I met, the victim's name is Rebecca Gould. I met her father while I was out there, and we keep in very close contact now. So I started publishing these articles through AMU. And here's where the overlap between counterintelligence and criminal investigation comes in, because all of a sudden people started messaging me. And some of these people had critical information to the case, firsthand knowledge. Some had been friends with Rebecca or had known her social circle. And all of a sudden, I remember one night I looked at my husband and I go, this is just like running sources. And so it's the exact same technique in terms of, you have to remember, and I have spreadsheets and stuff, but this source told me this, but I can't reveal that publicly, but I can use it maybe to, enhance my conversation with another source or whatnot. Anyways, it's been a fascinating experience. Unfortunately, no arrest yet, but we did get a new investigator put on the case. I think we finally brought enough pressure that they removed the previous investigator who had been assigned to it for 14 years and literally done nothing. So there is a new investigator on it now, and he is definitely working the case. So that's the positive. But it's been such an eye-opening experience, and it really, I guess, confirmed that I do have a lot of skills that can be applied to, trying to figure out an unsolved murder. So, and then what Erik alluded to with this other investigative journalist who I don't want to reveal any names yet, but I wrote an article on the importance of behavioral analysis in homicide investigation. And I published that earlier this year. And this gentleman reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've been working on something and I actually wrote a manuscript. Would you be willing to read it and give me your thoughts?" And so I did, and I was astounded. And so I reached out to first our editing department at AMU, who put me in touch with Erik and a few other people. And so they're all aware of what's going on now, but it's a very exciting case. And I think the work that's been done on it is just outstanding.
I mean, and these aren't cases you haven't heard of. I mean, these cases are ones that rival in terms of DB Cooper. That when you hear the names, like, oh yeah, I remember something about that. So.
How much work goes into these cold cases? I mean, it's I get it. It's assigned to Detective Smith, and they're just never going to get to it, because it's assigned because it has to be assigned. But no one's actually working this case legitimately. But how much man-hour time does it take to get these things moving forward again?
I can't even tell you how many hours I've spent on Rebecca's case. It's probably in the thousands, and it's all volunteer. I am confident saying that I spent more time researching and investigating her case than that previous investigator did over 14 years. But that's a question that's so hard to answer because it varies from one investigator to another and one jurisdiction to another, and caseload, budgeting, whether the detective is really incentivized to go do the work and figure it out, or so personal biases and so on. There's just so many mitigating factors.
And part of it is when you're doing a cold case, and this is the pattern that I've picked up on the last three of. In a normal investigation, you look at the timeline, you take things in order. So here's what happened before the violence or tragedy. Here's what happened during the tragedy. And now let's branch out in all these different directions on what happened after that, and then try to figure it out from there. When you're doing the cold case work, what you're ending up with, and it's one of the reasons why it's cold, is all of those different trails have gone cold. But when a cold case revives itself, it's because somebody at the very end has a piece of information. That's kind of what Jen talked about. And that's why crowdsourcing becomes an extremely important methodology to use. If somebody comes up and say, wait a minute, I have this one piece that's way on the back end of this, that this person said he was the one that was involved in this. And so you're not recreating the crime. You're starting at the back, and you're reverse engineering that lead to go all the way back that says, does this make sense? So when we started the Cooper investigation, Tom called me in 2011. He goes, hey, I got this hot one. Do you want to work? Let's be on my team as part of this. It was because he was doing an investigative report on a heroin drug triangle between Las Vegas, Seattle, and Los Angeles. And as he was interviewing and talking to somebody, the Cooper name came up. He goes, oh yeah, I can tell you who he is. He's this guy. And as he started doing the research, again, he was backtracking, saying, well, if this is the guy, all these things must be true. And as he started doing that, he learned that the initial name, I think it was Jason Briggs, that was identified as DB Cooper was not the guy, but it was his best friend and his associate. And so as soon as he made that identification, he was on the wrong trail going back. But as soon as he jumped over, everything fell into place. Now, it got to the point where we turned over over 100 pieces of evidence, to include his DNA, to include 2017, we sent a team out into the northern wilderness of California to dig where we thought he had landed and where we knew somebody had come up that said, yeah, I picked somebody up here on this same evening. I took him in my small aircraft, so we know who picked him up, flew him away, when he changed planes, where he went from that point. And none of that would have been true or been verified if we couldn't find a piece of physical evidence. Well, we went up and they found a piece of the parachute.
Yeah.
And that's part of the rest of the story for Cooper, is just that by reverse engineering that crime, we found this piece. And it was the strap for the reserve chute. So that little Velcro strap is actually a snap strap. That was still there, and they identified that piece. And you would not have just gone under the hills of California, hundreds and millions of square miles of wilderness, and say, right here is this location. Oh, what do you know? We just found this needle in the haystack. You would never have found that if the other pieces of intel or information that lined up to that made that so. And that's really what, as we're starting to investigate these other cold cases, it's kind of been the same thing. Somebody's given us the answer and we have to look at that very skeptically as a hypothesis. Well, let me go backwards and let's see if that lines up.
I know that Jen and I met, and by the way, I confirmed it. I found your email address in my Yahoo account. So,
oh, you did?
Yeah, but you don't use that email address anymore, I guess. Anyhow, it doesn't matter. So you and I met. We kind of both remembered a little bit, but it's not even quite 20 years ago that happened, and I couldn't tell you too much else about that meeting. So when you guys are doing these interviews and talking to people, and we know memories are fallible things, how you look at like a case like the Zodiac Killer, which is super complex, and there are so many, like it has to be this guy, except for they all have a fatal flaw where they can't be that person.
Right.
How do you sort out what is and isn't reality without fooling yourself into something, and just falling in love with your pick?
I mean, the way I go about it is I start with only the known facts and the known evidence. I push away everything that everybody's ever said. And this is exactly what I did in Rebecca's case. I literally made a list of what are the things that we know about her murder. And I started there. And I did some, headache-causing analysis for a couple months on just that known information. Okay, what can we deduce from this? What does it mean? And then the process actually worked perfectly because, I had that in my mind. But then people started chiming in. Like I said, people started messaging. People started wanting to give up information. But of course, you're going to have people in a cold case that, they want to mislead you. They want to put that disinformation out there. But if you keep your focus on those known facts and evidence and what we can deduce from it or learn from it, that really helps you sort through the truth, the truths and the false. But there's still some out there where I'm not sure. Like I'm not positive if that's true or not. But to me, that's how I have to do it. This he said, she said deal. It's just like you said, it's fallible. People's memories fade. Stressful situations can either cause your memory to be extremely sharp, but for some people, they just block it out. And so they can't remember the critical details. And so eyewitness accounts are just unfortunately, so unreliable, but you still got to run down every tip. So like Erik said, they got that one tip and they found the needle in the haystack because of it. So obviously that tip was correct.
Yeah. Right. And that's part of the one of the problems we're having now in a case we have is we know the case itself is 40 years old, but and almost everybody involved has passed on, and so part of the case the majority of the case that we're working is almost completely based upon physical evidence, what notes somebody wrote down at the time or something like that. Even the flight attendant who was on the Cooper flight. We did a History Channel documentary in, I think, 2017, and it was a two-parter. And the second part, everything was building up all this evidence against Robert Rackstraw. The last 15 minutes, the History Channel deliberately queered it at the end and put through in all these doubt and threw out and discounted all the different pieces of information we had, and then brought in this flight attendant and said, well, we just asked her and she doesn't remember remember that he looked like this guy. Well, almost immediately after the hijacking, she didn't remember it then. Why is she going to know now? Because it was such a traumatic experience for her. So you can't use that to discount our evidence, because, and I think what it really was is the producers of that program did not want this guy suing him because he was still alive. And so they deliberately sewed in doubt at the end of this documentary to make it sound like we really didn't know what we were talking about. And it's like, well, then why is it that we gave all these different pieces, additional pieces of information to the Bureau, and then the Bureau closed the case the very next week after we did that. So it's just, you're fighting with a lot of different, nobody wants to be embarrassed that they couldn't figure out a case 40 years ago. Right now, this other case we're working, we have this treasure trove of information that one of the folks involved wrote down and made videos of himself and took hundreds of pages of his own notes. Well, he passed away, and now his wife owns it, and she doesn't want to give it up. So we don't know if there's a monetary issue or whatever, but that's kind of the stumbling blocks you go into. Is you got old biases or old agendas mixed in with these new agendas of what folks have now, that you got to deal with all of them. You can't just solve the crime from 1970. You got to solve the crime all the past 50 years. Make sure, to figure out why people are hiding it or deceiving you or can't remember, all that stuff. You have to work that in.
And there's not just cold cases. There's these cases where, look, everybody's, I guess, trying their best and they all want to solve the crime, but there's a lot of innocent people behind jail, behind bars. And because of how we work due process, like this evidence exists now, the ability to process this exists. And well, that's not what the appeal's about. So you're going to sit in jail, but just so there's literally an Army convicted murderer. I think he's on death row. And there's evidence that shows the DNA under the victim's fingernails is not his, so the scratch stuff, but it's not yet admissible. And he's been tried for this crime 3 times. The military called him back after he'd been found innocent. And then, and then part of the reason why they won't process this is because there's no budget for it. So there's someone sitting on death row. Well, so do you guys worry about this side of it all too? And going into these cases where this doesn't add up?
I don't worry about me personally because I feel I'm very good at not having tunnel vision and not having personal biases. In the very beginning, when I was trying to draw up a profile of Rebecca's killer, I thought it was a female. I really thought it was a female. But then as I went down this road and learned all these other new details, I'm like, nope, it was a male. And I have no problem changing my mind or just going where the evidence leads me. And a good investigator will always do that, rather than focusing on one person and deciding it must have been him. What can I find that fits, that points to him as the perpetrator? No.
My question is also about the cold cases where the wrong person's in jail, and there's nobody looking into it. Do you guys have that as part of your guys' passion or no?
I'm sure you've heard of the Innocence Project. That's their entire purpose in life, is to exonerate, or not even exonerate, but just, I guess, prove the innocence of people that are wrongly convicted. Right. And
this guy went through it, by the way, the Innocence Project, and still ended up back in jail.
Really?
That's so good.
I am surprised that DNA did not exonerate him, because that's usually
they won't
what
examine it. There are some significant problems with this case, and it's one of the ones they have on, the Crime Channel all the time, because it is exasperatingly unknown as to what happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's like you got to deal with the agendas of the time and the agendas now. For Cooper, we tried to turn all this information over. Well, the guys who work the local field office at the FBI that work cold cases, it's the same team that works missing and exploited children. What's going to be your priority? Some old dude that's in the waning years of his life that only extorted $250,000 and never didn't kill anybody, or is this 13-year-old that's missing now your priority? That's just the way it works out.
Yeah. I'd be happy to work it from the other angle as well, if that opportunity presented itself, in terms of, hey, we think the wrong guy's in prison. Go do what you do and see if you can figure out, or either support that theory or refute it. I mean, I'd be happy. You would use the same skill set. So
Right.
I'd be happy to do that. I just haven't had an opportunity to work in that capacity.
And then what about the adjacent crimes where you're like, okay, if the if then test, like if this is true, then what about these other unsolved or other solved cases? Do we need, like the Green River Killers? Like, I don't know where I put everybody. I just kept killing them, and
Yeah.
so they're not solved, but we know that like most likely,
Right. And I think that was the case for the Atlanta killer in the mid '80s. It's just as the bodies kept piling up, and they suspected that, well, this could be more than one person. Even saying the Zodiac, well, this could be more than one person. You have to, again, you got to add that in as a possibility. That has to be one of your branches that you have to go. And that's why, when we get, in the one case where we're looking at possibly doing a dig this fall, that we have a, no kidding, this is the location, this is what it is. My, uncle wrote it down, back when it happened. As now we're going, well, you know what, we're going to go do this dig, but you can't make this nobody wants an Al Capone's vault scenario, redoing itself. You still have to approach it with skepticism, even though you have physical evidence. Somebody wrote it down and gave it as a no kidding. This is, I swear it's here. It's, 1,000 things could have happened in the last 20 years or last 40 years or whatever, that to that site or the location or anything. So even if it's physical evidence, you still have to, you can't even trust some of the physical evidence because so many things have changed.
When these cases have so much damage associated with them, I don't know if you guys saw I think it was called The Staircase, that documentary. Yes. And you just felt so horrible for everybody involved in this case. I didn't feel bad at all for the cops who clearly were messing around, but if the family's like, the victim's family's like, just let it go. Like, it just, we want to be done with it. They're not coming back. Do you just walk away, or do you still feel compelled to solve the thing?
I mean, I still feel compelled to solve it because in reality, I mean, we've run into this in Rebecca's case, actually. There's two of her siblings that don't want anybody looking into it, which to me is a little bit suspicious, but it unfortunately doesn't really matter in the end what the family wants. Like, if the law enforcement agency is assigned to solve it, they're supposed to do whatever they can to solve it. And I would think whoever's been buried in the ground as a result of murder would want it solved, no matter what the wishes of their family were. Right.
We got to the point on a couple of the cases that I'm working with Tom and Jen, that we're not really doing a hard investigation. We're now at the point where we're doing historical research because everybody involved has passed away. And even the family, the children of the victim are getting close to 67 years of age. So it doesn't matter at this point. You're still seeking, I guess you call us idealists or whatever. It's like, we're still seeking justice no matter how old it is.
Yeah.
When Kleinsmith wrote his book about the Zodiac Killer, and whether he got it right or not, he identifies certain key, but he also identifies hundreds of potential victims because the Zodiac said that he was going to go underground and not identify, and you start to just realize how impossible this is, and oh my God, how many murders there are that are not solved, and there's no chance of solving. I mean, as much as there could be 1,000 more of you guys, and you wouldn't be able to get to all of those cases because they're just it's such delicate, deliberate work. There's no way to do it.
Right.
And especially when a case has been, unsolved for decades. Again, your chances just obviously diminish every year. But the cool thing is, I mean, we are developing new technology like this genetic genealogy. I mean, that's helped with dozens of cold cases just in the last 2 years. Yeah. So you never know what else might, what other new technology might come about that allows us to, revisit these cases and get some answers.
I mean, I think I just saw an ad last night for genealogy for dogs.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
So you can turn in your dog's DNA and they will determine what kind of illness that your dog might get or is prone to or whatever. But for your dog, they said we can also go back and trace back your ancestry for your dog. It's like my dog, gosh, if somebody found him by the Detroit River, what's that? Who
Yeah.
I'm not sure what value that brings.
Right. But even so, it's like there's going to be a criminal investigation involving a dog where that's going to be important. And that's the point of DNA and where we've gone with that so far.
Mhm.
With the eruption of DNA technology and the ability to bring cases to bear based upon it, what are your guys' thoughts? Is there a Fifth Amendment argument against that? Where I won't give you a swab. I can't be forced to, testify against myself. But well, we went through your trash and grabbed your Kleenex, and it seems like that would be. I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying that that seems like hey, you guys forced me to testify because that is me, right? Or not? I don't know. What do you guys think?
There's a Fourth Amendment issue. I just wrote an article on this. It's fresh in my mind, but it's a Fourth Amendment issue of unlawful search and seizure that comes up.
Uh-huh.
But the thing is, so in our country, if anybody throws something on the ground or in a trash receptacle in a public one, it's now public property. You don't own it anymore. Right. So that's number one. But
that's where the Fifth Amendment thing comes in. Like you're taking pieces of me and using it as testimony against me.
Well,
no?
That's in terms of throwing trash away, no. I mean, that's a pretty widely known, I don't know what it is, a law.
Right.
Law is probably the wrong word, but that if you throw something away, you don't own it anymore. So if you don't want somebody to have it, don't throw it away. Keep control of it.
Yeah.
But the ancestry stuff has come up because these databases are, they're public. And however, not everybody wants their DNA used or their heritage or their ancestry, family tree, whatever, used in support of law enforcement. I know it seems astounding that people would not want to help, but some don't. And so, but now they have the option on these ancestry sites to opt in or out in terms of allowing law enforcement to utilize their
I'm
DNA
sure they'll
code.
honor that too. That option. Well, they've opted out. Sorry.
Well, in theory, I guess it just makes their profile invisible to law enforcement. So it's not doesn't even show up on the law enforcement end when they're, trying to build these family trees.
And when you study forensic science and especially DNA, you know that every time somebody enters a room, they're going to leave microscopic traces of themselves on that room, from a fingerprint to whatever. So it's almost impossible to say you can't get my DNA. It's one of those things where I may not submit to a swab or whatever, but that's how we got Rackstraw's DNA, because we sent an investigative reporter down and showed him the chart that I had made with one of my instructors, that he was dead center in it. And as he was talking, he was drinking out of a water bottle. He threw the water bottle away. So then the way out, the guy grabbed it.
Yep.
Out of the trash. And it was as simple as that to get his DNA. He probably had no idea.
Same with the Golden State Killer, I believe. I think they did basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, listen, this has been super fascinating. And as you guys advance in your cases that you're working on, please come back, because and also thanks for working on this impossible problem, because if not for your volunteer work, we wouldn't know the answer to some of these questions. And these families deserve closure. And I appreciate you guys doing that.
We're just trying to build the structure now for this group within our school. I think it's going to get a lot of popularity, but it's going to be trial and error. I mean, it's going to be like herding cats as we get all these folks in. I want to work on all this stuff. I'm ready to go. It's like, well, we still have to come up with a structure and a process and a methodology to make sure it's not. We want to do cold case investigation, not conspiracy theory.
Correct.
Right.
That kind of thing. So that's the balance that we're going to have to do. But as soon as we make headway in a couple of these other ones, you'll be the first person I come to tell you, have you talk all about it.
You guys will appreciate this. We had a guy on, he and his partner wrote a historical thing, and they did the same kind of thing, cold case. And they went back and they figured out that because of nightshade poop deposits near the Capitol, or not the Capitol, the White House, it was contributing to the death of people like Willie Lincoln, Zach Taylor, all these, all these folks that died suddenly, William Henry Harrison, they died from, this water being contaminated with human fecal matter.
Wow.
And it took all of these, like, why do these people keep dying in this era? It's like, well, here's exactly why. But, he had to be a doctor to be able to understand that part of the science and everything. And it's just a remarkable thing. So here's a cold case says that and that's historically, like, the historians recognize that this is the right answer. It wasn't, peaches and cream on 4th of July. It was this contamination. But that's a multi-100-year-old or a whole 100 plus the decades attached on top case.
Right,
so
right.
You never know.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right, you guys, thank you so much. I'm going to sign off here.
Sure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. Really appreciate it.